breakthrough builders. Welcome to the show. Welcome, Wen Park, CEO and Principal Analyst at Amalgam Insights. How are you doing?
Oh, doing great. I was just catching the last few minutes of the last panel, and I think it was a perfect setup for this panel that we've got right here on showing how to actually build agents. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I'm pretty excited about this.
Amazing. Super excited. When the stage is yours, take it away.
Terrific. Welcome everybody to this panel on how to build winning go-to-market agents and how to learn and scale. I'm pretty excited about this panel as I think one of the big concerns we sometimes have is being the smartest person in the room. I am not concerned about that right now because I know I'm not the smartest person in the room. We're going to have a lot of smart people here in the panel talking about how to actually create these agents. And I think we have a great distribution of people in this panel who are going to be showing up as we are going to have representation across developers, marketers, salespeople, people who are building startups, people who are at the enterprise level, making the case to Fortune 500 C-level executives. And we have a lot of great experience here as the people who are working here have all have graduate degrees. They all have worked in enterprise and large organizational settings. Everybody here, when you look at these resumes, I would just take a moment if you are in this watching this panel right now, literally write down these names and follow up with these people afterwards because they've got resumes that go across Adobe, IBM, just like all the big companies that you would want to work with, or they have dealt with this at a nonprofit level or at an organizational level, governmental level. We've got some of the biggest schools and greatest schools represented here as well. People have been to MIT. People have done the work and dug in deeply. So with that, just a quick introduction to our panel who has now shown up here. Darren Patterson, Dr. Tuba Duraze, Sean Harris, Ed Corno, Omer Har. Welcome to the panel.
Hello, hello.
Thank you.
Yeah. So before we dig in, can we do like a quick, call it 20-second introduction of each person? I'll just start with Darren. Introduce yourself.
Yeah, fantastic. It's great to be with you all today. I get the pleasure of leading our market strategy at a company called Make, which is all about automation and integration across your organization. And of course, that means for the last several years, that means incorporating AI into core business processes. I've been lucky enough to work with amazing go-to-market leaders across small organizations as well as large enterprise leaders like Adobe, and excited to talk about the future of work and what it looks like in an agentic world.
Great. Dr. Duraze.
Thanks so much. It's so great to be here. So I'm the CEO and founder of Amoeba AI. We're a new symbolic AI company looking at business intelligence use cases. Prior to that, I was qualified working as a VP of product. Prior to that, at the World Economic Forum. So all that is to say, I've had exposure to the hype and then now where we are in terms of AI, and excited to dig into it with everyone.
All right. Sean Harris.
Hi, my name is Sean Harris. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Coworked, where we have created a agentic project manager that we've named Harmony. And so I'm excited to be here. As being in a startup, I'm responsible for a lot with respects to really the go-to-market strategy and how we engage with our customers. And I'll share more here briefly.
Terrific. Ed?
Yeah, hi everybody. It's great to be here. It's kind of like, where do I start? I've been doing this for roughly 30 years. Started out really early on in the internet and worked with some large tech companies from HP to IBM, Ernst& Young, the consulting side, and it's been a great experience. And I've seen these different technologies kind of like go to wave pattern. And what's interesting, and I can't wait to talk about it all, and I've been involved with not only just like the internet, but then blockchain when it was really in its heyday, and now with AI, which I think I kind of label it as AI 3.0. Now we're at 3.1 with agentic AI. I look forward to talking to everybody about it.
Thanks. And Omer.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Omer. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Explorium. Explorium is a data aggregation specifically around AI. We aggregate data from multiple providers and provide that to agentic AI, specifically around go-to-market use cases. Before that, I worked in Iron Source, and before that in Microsoft Research for about 5 or 6 years, doing research specifically for machine learning. And intersection of machine learning and economics is a fascinating field. Um, I'm very excited to be here. It's a pleasure.
Thanks. And with that, let's just dig in to the first question. So as you can tell already, the resumes here are amazing when it comes to agentic development and deployment. So we've all been thinking about go-to-market agents. Everybody's played with agents. Everybody's played with generative AI. And we've all heard the hype around AI and how this is going to change the way we do business. But as all of you have practical experience dealing with agents, what do you feel like is a fundamental shift in the technology of agents that most organizations are not yet fully preparing for? And I'm going to just go in reverse order of where we started. So let me start with you, Omer.
Sure. That's a great question, actually. One of the things that we're kind of looking at and kind of thinking about here in Explorium. So if you think about how most go-to-market processes are going in today, you'll see them kind of stopping in three stops. So you start with a data provider. Think about the Zoom infos, the Simulus, whatever prospecting data you use, it then pushed into the CRM. And then within the CRM, it will be then pushed into a sequencer. That most of kind of the workflow that you run with go-to-market will go to those three stops. And I think that agentic overall AI and agentic workflow will change that dramatically, in a sense that not necessarily you now need all of the data to sit in every one of those stops. You don't need all of the data to sit in the CRM. Maybe you need a list of your ICP, those customers that you're a focus on, but definitely you don't need news about those companies, refreshed on a daily basis in the CRM. Instead, you'll have agents that will be right in the point of activation where you want to send the email, where you want to engage, where you have a AE having, research before he meeting with a specific customer, where the agent will pull all of the data from third party, for second party, from first party, will harmonize everything into a conclusion, giving your, prompts and questions, and then, we'll be able to activate that on the fly, either by writing an email, by maybe creating another outreach in LinkedIn, or by creating battle cards within your Zoom call when you meet those customers. And I think that this is a fundamental shift in the way that data flows within the organization, especially go-to-market data. And I think that most companies doesn't think about that already, definitely not prepared to it.
Interesting. Ed, I know you have a lot of experience bringing innovative new technologies and presenting to the C-level. I'm curious what you thought of that and what challenges you see as well.
I mean, right now we're just kind of getting our big clients, which are mostly big clients because it's IBM, right? We're really kind of interested in what we're trying to achieve and do. In the past, large language models seem pretty constrained. And now, we're making the small language models work with agents, which makes it even more efficient and more practical for an organization. Because if you look at, say, machine learning and RPA, robotic process automation, it's like the next super layer up from that to then create these agentic AIs. And of course, it's all using the same type of tools to build them out, Python, TensorFlow, et cetera, PyTorch to make it happen, which is what you really want, right? And so it's still AI in a sense. And a lot of people think agentic AI, what is it really going to do? Well, it kind of allows it to be autonomous. You then can actually then let it go do what it wants to do. You can train that model, and then it keeps learning and learning and learning and getting better and better all the time. So by making it an agent, it makes it more relevant, makes it smaller, makes it easier for companies across the board to adopt. I mean, that's what we run into all the time. It's like IBM You guys are revolutionary. You got great research. You're doing fantastic for us as thought leaders. But then how do we take what you're building and what's new and really apply it to what they do every day? So, I mean, that's what I run into, is seeing how it actually applies to their business and can make a difference.
Great. Thanks. And Sean, I'm curious, what challenges do you see when you're getting customers started? What are they ignoring?
Yeah, no, I think that we shouldn't lose sight. We're moving into a world where we're having software as a user, right? And so what I'm running into is I'll give you an example. Like as we were setting up our platform in a company, the original setup of the company ended up landing Harmony into the company's HR system, where Harmony was going to be collecting benefits, accruing PTO, and being put on a performance review because of the nature of the access that it needs. It went down this path of getting constructed as a contract, as a consultant within the environment, which opened up a whole conversation amongst the business users who wanted to, leverage the technology, and IT around what are we doing here? Like, what is going on? What is this going to do? And so I think thinking about software now being a user versus just being like something you install and other people use is a paradigm shift. And then the application of security against that user, I think, is going to be something that folks aren't quite prepared for. That'd be one thing that I know I'm running into in the real world.
Oh, really interesting. I'm going to come back to you on that one because I think that's a question that resonates across the board.
Yeah.
Tuba, I know I've been calling you Dr. Darazi because I know if I wrote a
Yeah.
PhD thesis, I would be telling everybody to call me doctor forever.
There's some joke in there about being called Dr. T and then me moving away from it because too close to Mr. T. So no, I go by Tuba. I think my opinion on this might be a little bit spicier and a little bit more future centered, but I think we're going to see folks moving towards a more neurosymbolic architecture from transformer architecture. I think some of the problems that we're facing now fall flat when it comes to neurosymbolic architecture, right? With transformers, like you're thinking about prompts, you're thinking about everything deterministic, every kind of business nuance. All of that kind of goes away on neurosymbolic. So I think that's where I see folks moving. And then on the data side, there's a huge trend around generating schemas on the fly. So you're sitting on top of this giant data layer. So generating those schemas on the fly, and then organizations essentially managing that semantic layer as like their second brain. That's where a lot of your efforts are going to go, versus right now, a lot of efforts are going into, can we get, all the data together, this amalgamation of data. So I think you're going to see trends in like folks moving up in that direction, which ideally means that there's a whole new era of like data jobs opening within companies as well, folks who maintain the semantic layer and manage it for any kind of agentic flows.
Sure, Tuba. Just a quick follow-up there. Could you describe what neurosymbolic means, as it might be new to some of our audience?
Yeah, so neurosymbolic is the easiest way to describe it. It's symbolic AI, which is mostly like deterministic AI without you having to kind of put rules there. And then a neural net. So in the case of Amoeba, as an example, we use a liquid neural net. And the reason that is really interesting is neural nets are generally adaptive in nature. So anytime a new data point gets introduced, you don't have to have the lag of like going back and kind of retraining the entire system. It's able to self-evaluate. So now think about that as like a living organism, which is kind of the structure that your agents will sit on top of. And then your agents themselves will also probably be on neurosymbolic models. So again, like I think we're making a lot of headway in terms of what you can get out of transformer models right now with prompts and with a lot of like rules that we set up, etc. But I think the future is like what happens when we kind of get out of the way and let it do what it's supposed to. Let the math, as they say, right?
Mhm.
And
So
where
you're using liquid AI?
I'm using liquid neural nets, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, a
Visible, yeah.
liquid neural net. Okay.
Great. And then Darren, what are you? So you're dealing with the strategy of building an agentic product, and what is going into that strategy that you're trying to build that's new and different?
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be hard to follow up on those very deep thoughts about what the future looks like. But one of the things I think companies are struggling with, and when they think about how to apply AI and AI agents into their organization, is clear approaches to testing and performing and performance monitoring. Um, if we take the word, let's back up to the fundamentals. Agent, it's a Latin-based word. It means to take action. And of course, for the last 100 years, we've done a good job of understanding how do we evaluate the performance of humans in an organization when they take action. But it's just as important, if not way more critical, for us to have infrastructure and systematic approaches to understanding and monitoring AI agents. And that is a whole structure around evaluations and being able to detect drift in a particular business process that you've got set up. And so it's going to be very important for organizations to think through specific strategies to identify any particular AI agent deployed in my organization, even if it's working right now. How do I ensure it continues to produce the same exact results? And that includes all sorts of infrastructure that's super critical, things like non-production replication of systems that these agents might interact with. How do I know that it's going to consistently produce the same results? And so that's one of the most important things I think organizations need to be thinking through is how do I ensure consistency over the long time, especially in a very fast-changing environment where these foundational models are changing all the time.
Mm-hmm. Great. Next, I'm actually going to go back to a kind of Sean's mention about the idea of software as a user. As you're thinking about how your agent starts being used in a working environment and how that software has to be a user, how is that different from how software has traditionally been set up? I'm going to toss it back to you to start with, Sean, but feel free to chime in, everybody else.
Yeah, like so classically, software has been installed or accessed and a individual clicks around and does their thing, right? I think that there are a lot of now, if you will, agentic solutions that are still providing some UI where maybe instead of 2 clicks, it's 1 click because the agent did something, or 1 click and the agent will run away and do something and come back. That is one approach, or for what it's worth, there's an approach where the software exists in the environment like a coworker. And in existing in the environment like a coworker, I don't click on my coworker. Like my coworker engages with me
Hopefully you
in the
don't.
places. Yeah, exactly. They don't engage with me. They engage with me in the places and spaces where we work, right? And so we have a thesis that is how, true agentic solutions should be delivered. And that's through a mechanism that feels, for what it's worth, in the world we live in, that the agent is a remote colleague who, I always like to joke and say they're somewhere in Boulder, but, they're sitting on silicon, right? And so it's just a different mindset about user experience. The UX of it is not centered around the path you take through clicking, but it's the tone of the response. It's the how quickly or how slowly it gets back to you in certain situations. It's maybe the channel it chooses to communicate to you on. It's maybe a decision not to respond. Like there's just a different way to think about it if you're truly trying to achieve something that is going to sit aside people in an environment or a situation. I where we're building such that it feels like another colleague, another user, truly.
It's a good point.
Yeah, and I'd
It's
like to make a
interesting you
comment
brought
here. I
that
mean,
up
it's one of
really
those things
quickly.
that, sorry, Dr. T, but
No, go
it's one of
ahead.
those things where you can position and do the analogy that's like one of your workers or coworkers. I mean, ultimately, and in a way, it can behave that way because basically it'll go off and do whatever it wants. So it's like, how do you then control that agent, agentic agent, and where it's going, what it's doing? Because a lot of it is like goal oriented and wants to do what it wants after it learns. So, I mean, that's the challenge that we're facing right now is how do you get these self-directed type of decision-making agents to behave the way they should? And so that's, I think, a challenge that like the second phase as we roll out agentic agents across the board in a business. Go
Yeah, I
ahead.
was going to say my comment was going to be on just the observability layer becoming more and more important. I think, Darren, you mentioned that when this sort of system is coming up. There was a panel earlier with Brett where we talked about agent to agent selling in B2B, like how that changes as well.
Right.
And yeah, so I think it's an interesting move. I wonder if they're an individual like employee is sort of a cluster of agents and not necessarily even a singular agent. And then the person who manages them, how matrix does that become? Where does that sit? I think it'll be really interesting to watch.
Yeah, the
And I think
framework matters. When you're doing this, like the framework that is the underlying mechanism for helping with keeping appropriate guardrails that has to deal with the orchestration. Because you're right, Tuba, that when it's all said and done, some of these agents, I know especially mine, shouldn't be called an agent in a singular way. Like it is
right.
an agency of right now we are in probably close to 500 agents, if you will, that are running within this platform. So the framework allows for orchestration in a broad way, and the framework helps to control for the planning and the execution at
Yeah, and to your point, Sean, I think it's a situation where you're going to have agents that control other agents, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
It's
for
how
sure.
you use those models and develop and put them together. And I think that's going to be the best route to go forward with versus saying an end user like us monitoring it. It's hard to keep track of all the different agents out there ourselves, right? So there's going to have to be automated agents that have that guide rail type role.
Yeah,
Correct.
but I think that the question is more about, think about the tooling and overall how SaaS and software were optimized in the last I would say 30 or 40 years now. Like as Sean said, it's not about clicks anymore. So if you think about Google, it's not about going into Google and kind of look for a query and see what the response is. It's actually by
Right.
asking what you want to know, and there's agents that run around, pull all the information, and provide you with summarization, a good summarization of what you need to know. And I think that's kind of where I say when you say first, I love software as a user. I think that that's a really good way to capture it. And I definitely agree that many of the tools that currently are serving humans, and if we're talking about go-to-market tools, think about those prospecting tools, which are designed for humans, which are no longer needed from that, not the human needed.
Right.
The
Right.
process itself, the tool will not be needed to be, click, click, click. You just write down what you want, and an agent or agencies, as you said, will pull the data that you need or do whatever workflow you want to run.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Excellent. On that note, thinking about how you're designing these agents, we're going to start high level and start getting deeper throughout the hour, but still staying a little high level for right now. As you're thinking about how to deploy these agents, and as Sean said, create an agency of agents. I love that, by the way. What are you thinking about from an kind of an ethical perspective and in terms of the governance issues of bringing agents into an enterprise? And Darren, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think, and specifically as we talk about go-to-market AI agents, it's going to be really important to think through different elements of transparency. And one thing I think about actually a lot is to what extent are agents required to self-identify themselves as an AI agent. If we're talking about outbound prospecting, there's certainly increasing rules and regulations. FCC is working on that as we speak to bring clarity and here in the US about whether an AI agent needs to self-identify as an agent and whether I have to opt out or opt in, what that process looks like. But I also think about it in a really interesting way inside of a real organization. I can imagine in an easy thought experiment 2 years from now, joining a new company, having a few Zoom calls with 3 or 4 colleagues, some people on the phone today, and then learning a month later that one of them is actually an AI persona. That would be easy to imagine, and I'm
It's
not sure how
happening.
I feel about it when I ask it how its kids are doing. Now the weekend was. It'll be interesting reflection on that particular use.
It's happening.
Very interesting. Uh, Ed, I'll pick on you for a little bit. When you think about this from an
You're not picking on me. I'll just
yeah,
tell you some of my knowledge, my opinion. That's all.
Not picking on
yeah.
you yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, but when you think about this from an enterprise governance perspective, obviously
Mhm.
something you've had to think about with a lot of different types of emerging technologies.
Mhm.
Where do the weak spots happen?
I mean, that is one of the strongest areas that IBM's been in, and I'm not doing an IBM commercial. I just want to make sure everybody understands where IBM's position is. We pretty much took the whole concept of AI back in 1952 with Model 5180 and actually proved out that AI could exist. And so that's why I say it's AI 3.0, and now it's 3.1, and each one of these iterations gets more sophisticated and better based on the modeling and everything else that goes along with it. But one of the biggest, strongest points that IBM puts out there is our governance side. And so we have a product called watsonx.gov. Governance is one of the most, I'd say, popular type of technologies that we market to our businesses and clients across the board, because basically they want to make sure that they can control what's happening from an hallucination standpoint, what biases banks are interested in that, all these different companies are, because they want to make sure that those agents communicate or interact with the end user properly. And it goes back to the concept of how do you control these agents and where they go and what they do. And that's like the next level for the governance piece of it. Because at this point, most companies are looking at governance as a point of view for really specific areas that address law and regulations. But the next level is, all right, how do you govern these agents that are just kind of running around and just learning things on their own without any kind of guardrails? And that's what makes our, Watson X type platform so strong and why we're doing so well. And I think if you look at that from that perspective of how you actually create it, engineer it, develop it, and then design it, that has to be a key part of it when you test it out. And I think you're going to see more governance interjected into the overall creation of agentic AI.
Mhm. Yeah, interesting to hear about that. The governance of independent agents, especially as
Right.
because that's just part of that promise of these agents that they are supposed to be able to work independently
But
on their own.
a lot of people don't talk about this with AI. It's really interesting is the data integrity, the data capabilities, the data quality. Because if you don't have data quality, if the data is not correct, automatically that agent's going to go out and do different things that it shouldn't be doing.
But
So you've got to go in and cleanse the data and make sure the data is correct in the first place when you're building up that model. That's the importance of having a data scientist on board or data scientist to be able to do that.
But I think that that's, by the way, that it's true not only for AI, even, it seems like a long time ago, but even when ML kind of broke into our life,
Right.
if you have, the model is as good as the data that you feed into it. That's a cliche that everyone knows.
But it's so true.
It is completely
Yeah.
100% true. But I think that if the data is wrong, then regardless of what you do, even human will get it wrong. Human will get it wrong, agent will get it wrong, model will get it wrong. But once the model, like I think that the data needs to be as clean as possible. It's never perfect.
Right.
But the question is how agent can help us kind of also overcome. I think one of the things that ML is not doing very well with while human can is that if
Mhm.
there is seeing let's say a small outlier in the data, a human will identify those. Will say, well, this is might be an outlier, and not necessarily I'm going to pull all my attention to it. ML will usually not. It will just spit out whatever that may be, with his weights. And I think that AI in many cases can say that something is wrong. In some cases, we're seeing, for example, we're using AI extensively in order to do QA on our data. And in
Right.
many cases, the AI will kind of the model will say, it doesn't seem, for example, if you have an email for a person, he's working in company A, however, his email, the domain is different, AI will immediately identify that there is something wrong with the email and point that out. That's just an example to
Exactly.
how quality can work.
I think that's like the explainability part of it, right? That's like almost goes without saying. When we talk about governance, I think you're also talking about the flip side of the coin, where we just want to know where the answers are coming from and with what degree of confidence, I
Mhm.
assume. I don't think data, again, maybe a spicier take. I don't think data cleanliness is going to be an issue in the sense I don't think it's something humans are going to deal with. I think it's something that you layer an agentic layer on top of. I think with the advent of like synthetic data, synthetic users, even, I think all of that is in service to kind of fix this idea of like humans will never get the data right. It's always going to be messy in that sense. So in order to best use these platforms, like you have to find a technology solution to that for sure.
Kuba, that's a really interesting point because I feel like a lot of vendors are right now saying AI, especially called legacy vendors, are saying AI is all about the data. Data cleanliness and data quality are paramount to even getting started with building models and building agents. But what are the actual biggest challenges of getting started to create an agent in production? What level of, call it, cleanliness or visibility or observability do you really have to get to be able to get started? Or is this a different type of technology where it is less, call it, deterministic or fixed and more conceptual in nature?
I think it's there's a mixed bag here. So in the current world that we're in, I think the best way to kind of productionize an agent is to, again, to Ed's point, like have some level of governance, have some level of observability that a human can interact with. So you force some sort of like reinforcement learning, some sort of like human in the loop feedback that allows you to get there faster. That's the world now. I think in my head, I say 3 to 5 years, maybe it's a little bit longer. I do think that there's this concept of like agency, like evaluators, etc., that kind of help determine when a product is ready to graduate from one level to another level, from like the level of pilot to actually productionize. The one thing I'll say is increasingly with a lot of technical founders, this concept of like MVP is very, very vague now. And like MVPs are actually a productionized app. Like you'll see a lot of productionized apps that are just still what you would consider from like a bigger SaaS company's perspective as like tiny little pilots that they're running. And I think that it's good to look at that and make sure that we're not conflating technical limitations with like ROI limitations in the sense like they might just pilot things longer to make sure the right kind of value is proven out versus taking a long time to deploy something in production at a massive scale because like technically it can or cannot work. So I think there are like two lenses there.
Yeah, interesting. Omar, I know you have a couple of thoughts here.
Yeah. No, I think that's specifically in terms of, yeah, I'm going to go back to the ethical point. Like, how do you think of that from the ground up? And I think that specifically with ground go-to-market, I think that privacy is an issue from that perspective. So in the last 5 years or 6 years between CCPA and GDPR, you can see kind of a massive the whole industry kind of focus on how to bring those regulations to life and actually make sure that you actually withstand those regulation. That was hard, and now a new standard is coming up with how we interact with AI and how we make sure that PII is saved within that area. If you think about, that you shouldn't train data on PII as an example, but there is 100 of those. So I think that one of the issues or one of the difficulties that we currently see, and by the way, uh, we see a lot of companies, big and small, not only enterprise, already are deep inside and kind of deep into the question of what are they letting their data and their PII run on. Are you giving, for any AI can run, can you run DeepSeek with, a list of all of your employees? For example, as a question, should we do that or not? And I think that this is something that regulation is already working on, but I think that there is one thing of defining the regulation and then another layer of how to adopt those regulations, make sure that you actually, meet those criterias. That can take a much longer while.
Interesting. Excellent. And
Yeah.
I know, Darren, you have some thoughts about this, both in your current role at Make as well as your prior history at working in automation and across a variety of marketing tasks.
Yeah, I think I'll pick up on what Kuba mentioned as maybe the hot take of data quality. And so I think So we all agree that data quality matters, that data going into these agentic systems is going to be what actually differentiates one well-designed system and agency versus another that has unpredictable outcomes. But I think it's worth identifying, why has data quality always been a challenge? If we look at specifically in go-to-market efforts, we all know that well-known, well-worn memes about trying to get salespeople to enter data into Salesforce or whatever the CRM. Like, that's been the push for years and years and years. And so we end up with bad data, and we're always trying to get them to their data and turn it into deterministic, very fine data points. But I think that's one of the greatest opportunities with AI generally. Just generative AI is very good at capturing call notes from a sales call, identifying the relevant data points, and of course using those in a much more qualitative manner than a highly deterministic. You always have to have the data in the exact same structure. So in some ways, I think the data quality thing is going to be less of a challenge for organizations to nail really effectively. And AI agent systems are actually very good at dealing with this more kind of nuanced data, as opposed to these kind of old school data structures. You got to get everything in the exact same format and perfect quality.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And so as you're dealing with these kind of call it less nuanced, more conceptual systems, we are also dealing with the challenge of having these agents that are trying to conduct multiple steps and multiple workflows and engaging with each other. So Sean, you brought up earlier the idea of agents working with each other, the idea of this agency of agents. How do you keep agents from frankly, forgetting what they're trying to do before they get to the end point? When we're talking about these more complex go-to-market processes, these projects, these multi-layered conceptual capabilities.
Yeah, not to be the dead horse. I definitely think like the framework that you use and how you've constructed your framework to take advantage of understanding some degree of state knowledge, as well as like how you deal with kind of in context, short term and long term memory, is super important when dealing with situations where you may start something on day one and not revisit it until day 15, and then want to reflect on something that happened on day 7. Like, you have to have in place mechanisms that support this. We certainly take a perspective of this is not just about like an application. Like, we're thinking about a system, right? There's a lot of there's a systems thinking perspective that you need to have about orchestrating this environment of agents. And it has taken a lot of thought. Like when it comes to things like data, like we have an agent that deals with data quality, right? And if something's not good, it pushes back and says, you know what, this is inadequate. This is not good. This is not what would be considered gold standard to be a part of the input to go into kicking off the planning and subsequent workflows. You have to, and this is where the hundreds of agents come in, because you're having to kind of think about, well, what am I trying to accomplish? How am I going to find, if you will, the right place in the model's distribution? And of course, like, it's not even just always about the model. Like, you can use all sorts of, algorithms and approaches to getting one of these systems to work as expected. So I think it is around like taking like a systems point of view on building these things and giving them their own little like realm to work in. And well, let me back. It takes good design,
Hmm.
good design before jumping in with all of this. Someone mentioned DeepSeek is like, these models aren't. If you're using like an yeah, your own hosted version of any model, and then nothing is learning. Like these models, except for if it's tuba, doing liquid stuff, these models are static, right? They don't just learn because it happened. It learns because there's a system that is keeping track of information that it references as a part of the context window, and it feels like it learned something, but it's just referencing something else, right? So I have a lot of customers who will talk about, oh, is this thing gonna learn? Like,
Yeah.
nothing, it doesn't work like that, right? And I think that's a point of clarification we should make sure is out in the world. Learning is a very intentional activity, not something that just happens because I said, hello to something,
AI, magic.
Magic.
Yeah.
It's
Yes.
not, it's like anything else. Like if you want a computer vision model, you had to train on a ton of stuff.
Mhm.
These large language models are fixed, so except for the liquid ones.
Mhm.
Oh, I empathize with that point so much because I feel like every enterprise account that you get into, RFPs are really, really long. And the number one question
Number
they're trying to
one.
get out of it is like, yes, like, are you training on my data? So I agree with you. There needs to be some clarity around that. I also think the definition of privacy changes because I
Mm.
think that a lot of times the hang up to like not sharing your data to train things is like this other party is getting this unfair advantage. When folks start getting, paid for the data that they're sharing on an individual level, on an organization level, then I feel like that barrier doesn't go away, but it changes quite dramatically. So I can see a future state where I'm incentivized to have better models out there because as an organization, I function better if there are better models out there. So I'm incentivized to then also say, I'll share some data, trade you for like some amount of dollars against the data that I'm sharing in order for your models to get better. So I think there's like a new services layer there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Ed, I was curious from your perspective when you think
Sure.
about strategic goals and maintaining that attention. How are you balancing, the need for that personalization and actual goal attainment versus the balance of actually keeping things private?
So personalization versus keeping them private, I mean, that is a challenge because, when you look at, and IBM put that out a while ago that we would back up any kind of liability issues when you're talking about, copyright, et cetera. But, it's one of those things where, you know, private, how do you define that? And then personalization, it's like we have to give them permission to whatever entity we're going in and pulling the data and interacting with. That's kind of kicks it off, starts it off. And so, I mean, that kind of enables some of the privacy issues that may come up. And so I think of a perspective as more from like the user side when you talk about privacy and then personalization itself. And getting back to like agents learning, correct in the sense that they don't really learn that deep except some of the newer type agents that are being developed. But they do look at the task and see, okay, Ed Corno went out and every Friday at 4 p.m. he has a meeting. That agent will automatically then set up that meeting. See what I'm saying? So there's certain restrictions based on the tasks that are done. So those agents will analyze that task, come up with a task like type creation, and then execute on it, and then do an assessment and then adapt from it.
Yeah.
And I've
Just
seen
not
that
the
multiple
model.
times.
Just not the
Yes.
model. That's
Yeah.
what I was saying. Not the model. It does that.
Right,
Like,
right,
but agents with memory and all that for
right,
sure.
right. And then from like the actual language models, when you take a look at, say, LangChain, which is what we use consistently, and we have Granite, that's our large language model at IBM. But you got Meta too with Llama and others, right? And Deep with Google. But all those all have kind of, I think, issues in the sense of you want to go with the small language models because it doesn't take up a lot of compute. It's easier to manage. The data quality is better. The agents are easier to come from and actually give birth to. So, I mean, there's a lot of advantage from going that direction. But as far as like privacy versus personalization, that's a really kind of nebulous area, except that the governments of the world and laws are coming about and saying, especially over in Europe, privacy is a big concern. And so the permission side is easier here in the United States than it is over in Europe and other countries.
Mhm.
But I think that's going to change to a certain degree. And I think maybe if everybody saw on the news recently that basically Google can take your information if you give it permission to do it, to then use and build out any kind of model they want. And so that actually was handed down, I guess, a week or so ago in the United States. So, I mean, those are the things to think about when you're going out and giving permission to say go on Copilot or ChatGPT. you got to be concerned about, all right, is this going to impact my privacy?
Thanks. So as we're talking about bringing models into production, obviously, this is not just about a proof of concept. This is about maintaining agents as ongoing systems and in production. And so what needs to be taken into account, because this is actually a pretty complex challenge. We're talking about data access, putting some sort of model on top of that, having some sort of agent interface that you have customized, and then regulating the outputs, right? So we've got this kind of sandwich or stack or what have you. I know, Omer, you had some thoughts here, so I'll start with you.
Sure. So I think that again, I'm going back to kind of defer to Sean. Sean, I think that that's what I do most of this discussion. So apologize for that. But I think that he mentioned kind of it's just not using just a model is a system. And I don't remember who coined the phrase of kind of cognitive system. How do you make those thinking machines, thinking system that have their guardrails and have the access to the data and how you build agent on top. And I think that when you go into production and you're trying to think about how you move this, how do you get it's not moving into production, it means getting the value out of the system, getting the ROI back of the system. When you think about that, you need to think about how the system end to end will work. Like how do you do the guardrails? How do you make sure the data quality is there? How every part of that system works in tandem in order to get to your desired outcome and then the ROI on the other side of that. So I think that when we think about moving things into production, we're actually thinking about all of the I don't want to say little details, but it's big details in many cases that are comprising that you need to do in order to push that into actual production system. How do you make sure that the data is there? How do you make sure that the non-deterministic flow will actually work in at least X% of the time? You need to define the KPI, you need to define the evals to actually run that. So I think that that's kind of the main point. When you want to push something to production, start with thinking about the system and not as an API call. It's not a wrapper over an API, but actually what the system is in order to get the ROI back.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Darren, I'll ask for your perspective as well.
Yeah, one of the things we haven't had a chance to go deeply into it, but it connects to many of the topics we've just spent time on. Again, the whole point of agents deployed in your organization, in your existing enterprise systems and your existing workflows is that they have access to tools. Those tools are all across your organization. It's the same tools that you give to your employees when you onboard them to make sure that they can be effective in their job. But as we're particularly it seems crazy, but we're still in early days of AI agents. So it's super important to recognize the controls that you have to manage access to those tools. And we take a lot of this stuff for granted. Those of us that have been in software for a long time, that when I log into HubSpot or Notion and I search for a record, there's a whole set of permissions getting applied to me and how I interact with that software. And it's a very clear set of rules about what records I can access and what actions I can do. And so additional consideration as people are starting to think about how to deploy these into their systematic workflows is thinking about what access should AI agents actually have to different systems and processes, and making sure that you don't just carte blanche give your AI agents access to your entire Salesforce. There's a lot of bad things that could ultimately happen and unintended consequences with that. And so really having a thoughtful approach to thinking about what are the right tools and the right other deterministic processes or sets of things that AI agents should be able to interact with. And of course, you have to understand your business process exactly as Omer referred to. It's so often that people say, hey, we want you to help us digitally transform our business, but they don't understand their business. And so it's hard to apply that to whether it's deterministic workflows or agentic workflows. You have to understand your business in order to apply AI in it.
Yeah, let me dig a little further into that and I'll ask you for a follow-up, but I also want this to be an open question. So what does that look like? Because with software, we're used to having this control plane with all sorts of little clicky boxes that we use to manage governance, but agents, I don't think work like that. Are we writing a contract? Are we figuring out how to do this on a code-based basis? How would you think about that, Darren?
Yeah, in our specific area and at Make specifically, we spend a lot of time thinking about how you can visualize agents within your existing workflows and processes, and visualize how agents work together in the kind of agent-to-agent interactions that Sean mentioned earlier. So there is a new skill set absolutely being developed across lots of different of your traditional roles and responsibilities that you do need to have a capability to understand how AI works in a business process. And very often you're whether you want to or not, you're asking your employees to design and manage a process. And you can do that visually, even if the interactions happen autonomously behind the scenes when you're not actually working with it. So being able to understand the relationship between tools and agents and the inputs and the outputs and how to evaluate success, those are all the things that we expect are coming closer and closer to actual business operators as opposed to just IT teams that are coding these things up in Python or wherever else.
Yeah.
I think if it's a homebrewed solution, by the way, I heard this analogy the other day where like observing an agent architecture, it's like basically you're in a cockpit on autopilot, but the pilots still need to be there just in case something goes wrong. So if it's homegrown, like you can imagine that you have pilots within your organization itself. And for folks who are kind of building and selling this as well, then you need to kind of create that connection. If I have that skill set, my customer is not going to be successful unless like I teach some version of that skill set to them on how to observe it. So the way like observability looks around these agents is, I think, going to vary through time. I agree with you, Darren. I think they need to be very visual because I think people visually adapt to workflows in that way a lot better. But I do think like someone needs to like really principally understand like the architecture, like what's happening behind the scenes.
Yeah. One of the things that we have observed is that so for a lot of the solutions that a given agent needs to access, those solutions will have API integrations that are going to be OAuth based that are adhere to whatever RBAC put in place. And so for many external systems, you can rely on existing methods for controlling access to read, write, and delete, and what have you, using these integrations, right, with OAuth. When it comes to things like if you want access to Gmail or M365 environment, there are both firms offer like graph APIs where you can get access to specific things with very specific rights and privileges that again adhere to the way that you would control a user. I don't think, certainly that everything has been covered for, but when you look at, again, whether it be an existing SaaS solution or it be kind of core productivity apps, there are mechanisms now that you can leverage to give your agent the appropriate access so it's not just running rampant in the environment. Like that's just not how this will work. But again, I think even there, before you're going to production, to go back to kind of the inquiry earlier, like, you have the means and the scale, get an army of people to red team the thing, right? Ask it to write a haiku about, your sales data, and joke, but get it to try and do things that you don't want it to do. I think is a critically important step in ensuring its readiness for the real world.
So there is just as an anecdote, there is a famous experiment that was run, I don't know, about 3 or 4. It actually was a competition that ran about 5 or 6 months ago. That they gave a secret to an LLM, and then they ran a competition who can pull the data, can pull the secret out of it, and it was about not too long after that, the beginning of the competition. Surely before they anticipated, someone were able to crack the code and pull the secret from it. And I think that one of the things that you kind of mentioned is that not authentication, but actually the authorization part of all of that will be part of the kind of the current API authorization that we have. The point is that we usually, when you give an employee the authorization to actually use a system, you expect him to be honest and expect him to be loyal to the company and so on. Not necessarily the same traits and the same characteristic can be applied to LLM. So the whole concept of who do you give permission and what he can do with that permission might be changing. I'm not a security expert myself, but it seems that not necessarily act the same way.
Mhm. All right. Amazingly, we are almost near the top of the hour. This has been an amazing
More
hour.
time, more time.
I know it's such an educational conversation. I'm hoping this continues in some way, shape, or form afterwards. But I'm going to go to my final question here so that we've talked a lot in detail about how agents can help optimize go-to-market efforts and the challenges that we are going to have in bringing these agents to life. At the end of the day, how can we ensure that these agents help people to do a better job at the end of the day? How do we help employees to actually get value added outputs from all these agents that we are creating right now? Ed,
Yeah.
I'll start with
Yeah,
you.
I just want to make a quick comment about how, go to market's critical and agentic agents will allow that to happen, but it's really like focusing on the use cases. For instance, we really haven't touched on that towards the end or anything, but like market analysis and insights, that's a natural for agentic AIs to go out, pull out that information, market trends, kind of insights from the competition, basically how it interacts with consumer behavior, what's going on there. Then like automated customer engagement too, which we're seeing from our clients wanting to know more about, which is how can you look at basically that personalization outreach can work out and how you can really kind of target basically your customer and optimize that feedback from them because you as a marketer want to know how well whatever your product or service is and agentic agents can allow that to happen. The last one I'll talk about, which is kind of dear to my heart, which is basically sales enablement and lead priorities. Because if you can really target someone that's about ready to buy whatever your product service is through agentic agents, that speeds up the whole process and finally gets you to that close. So, I mean, that's really a huge benefit. And everything we talked about, you have to build off of that and go in reverse from a technology standpoint to be able to get that information out there to whatever client you have.
All right. Omer, same question.
Yeah.
I think that it's as always when you buy anything to the business, but technologies in particular, you start with the business case. And I think that one of the things that we're very focused in Explorium is how do we solve a specific business case. What we usually do is working with companies that actually build go-to-market agents and go-to-market AI on top of our infrastructure in AI. And one of the things that is always critical for us is to first identify the business case, and then we can talk about technology. The whole company is super kind of technological in heart, so it's usually fun to do that. But the first step that you want to do is to make sure that the business goals not only the business goals for the decision maker and the kind of the champion that we work with is identify what exactly they want to do. In our case, it might be that the go-to-market need to be quicker. They want to avoid the hassle of combining, 10 different data sets. Regardless of what they need to do, first you need to identify that. Then you need to go back and start thinking about how agent can help, how agent in your technology specifically can help him do that. And I think that some of those, in some cases, especially because things are moving so fast, in many cases you're getting trapped in the hype and not in the value that you're seeing. And that's perfectly fine, especially for a startup because everything is moving so fast. It's hard to sometimes understand what is real and what is not, and what is already proven and what is not. But I think that if you get to every business issue or problem that you're trying to solve, starting with what are you trying to solve? Like, what is the actual business issue? Not in terms of technology and AI and agent, actually, how the business will work with and without your solution or with the solution that you're trying to create. Then that you need to start with that. After that, if you keep
Exactly.
your eyes on that ball, the rest will follow.
Definitely true.
All right. Sean,
Yeah.
one last thought.
Yeah, no, I think like how they can help, like we should never lose sight of the physics of human change, right? And that being things need to be more incremental in nature for us, right? In terms of how we onboard things. So like not forgetting like there's an ideal, I forget the architect or designer, but it was this idea of like Maya. It was like most advanced yet acceptable, right? And so it's looking at how can you bring forward and clearly in understanding a customer on a given workflow, how can you inject something that is more advanced, the most advanced, yet still adjacent enough that you're able to get, traction with it. You're able to get people to change towards it. Change management in this space is should not be underestimated. There's a lot of fantastical things that we can do, but if we forget the idea that human change is required as a part of adoption, it'll fall flat in its face. So never forget Maya.
Thank you. And on that
All right,
note, we are
okay.
at the top
Gotta
of the
go.
hour. Thank you so much
Thank
to
you so
everybody.
much.
I know there's so much more we could talk about, but thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Such an
everyone.
insightful panel. Thank you so much, Win. Again, before we transition to our actionable part, agentic demo part, Win, what's the best way to support you? And Win is here. When?
Oh, I'm sorry. One last question. What was that?
Yeah, the question was, what's the best way to support you?
Oh, simply keep in touch with what I'm doing here at Amalgam Insights. I'm an industry analyst. I also keep track of these trends. You just heard from 5 of the smartest people I've ever met, but I talk about this stuff as well. Let's keep in touch with me on LinkedIn. It's just Hyun Park. You can find my profile easily enough.
Awesome.